Long, long ago, humans still lived as hunters and gatherers. They roamed from place to place, following animals and searching for berries, nuts, and roots, but one day something began to change. People noticed that when they dropped seeds near their camps, new plants sometimes grew there later. At first, they thought it was magic. They didn't know that tiny seeds could hide the secret to a new way of life. When they saw green sprouts rising from the soil, they started to wonder, could they grow their own food? That single question changed human history forever. Imagine a small family living near a river. They gathered wild grains and crushed them into flour. One day, a child spilled some seeds on the ground. A few weeks later, the family saw tall stalks of grain growing exactly where the seeds had fallen. They were amazed. Maybe they didn't need to chase food anymore. Maybe food could grow where they stayed. That was the beginning of farming. Instead of wandering endlessly, people began to plant seeds on purpose. They learned that the sun, the rain, and the earth worked together to make life grow. Every morning, they checked their plants, protecting them from hungry animals. They watered them when the ground was dry. They learned patience, a skill hunters rarely needed. Farming was hard work, but it brought hope. When the first harvest came, people celebrated. They cooked the grains, shared them with neighbors, and realized something wonderful: they had food for tomorrow. It was the first time in history that humans could store food for the future. With stored food came security, and with security came change. Tribes no longer had to keep moving. They built simple huts near their fields. They cleared stones from the soil, made rows for planting, and used sticks to dig small holes for seeds. Over time, they invented better tools: stone hoes, wooden plows, baskets for carrying crops. The earth became their partner. They began to understand the seasons: when to plant, when to harvest, and when to rest. Spring became a time of planting. Summer, a time of growth. Autumn, a time of harvest. And winter, a time to wait and prepare. These rhythms connected people to nature like never before. Children helped their parents in the fields, learning how to tell which soil was good and which seeds grew best. They chased away birds that tried to steal the grain. At night, families sat by the fire, eating food they had grown themselves. It tasted better because it was earned with their own hands. As people grew more skilled, they began to experiment. They planted different seeds: wheat, barley, lentils, peas. They realized that some plants grew well in dry places, while others loved the riverbanks. They even began to save the best seeds from each harvest for the next year. That was the birth of selective farming, the first science humans ever practiced. With each season, their crops grew better. Villages began to appear where fertile land met fresh water. Fields stretched toward the horizon, and people started to see themselves as caretakers of the land. They discovered that plants needed time and love. They weeded the fields to keep them clean. They watched the sky for signs of rain. Sometimes storms ruined everything, and the people had to start over, but they didn't give up, because farming gave them something priceless: hope. The first farmers learned to share work and rewards. One person might plant, another might harvest, and another might store the grain. This cooperation made communities stronger. Food connected them. They started to trade extra crops for meat, shells, or tools. For the first time, not everyone had to hunt. Some could specialize, making pottery, weaving baskets, or building shelters. And all of that began with a single seed in the dirt. Gardens began to appear near homes. People planted herbs, fruits, and vegetables they liked. Mothers taught children which leaves could heal wounds or calm stomach aches. Fathers built small fences to keep animals out. Each garden was different, a little world of color, smell, and taste. Children loved to explore them. They chased butterflies, picked berries, and learned that food came from life, not from luck. And so, gardens became places of learning and love. They were the first classrooms on Earth. Some people even began to decorate their gardens with stones or small carvings. They didn't just grow food, they grew beauty. They learned that caring for the land brought peace to the heart. When rains came and fields turned green, people sang songs of joy. When crops ripened, they held festivals with dances and feasts. They thanked the sun, the river, and the soil for their gifts. They began to believe that nature itself was sacred. That's how farming shaped not only human lives, but also human hearts. It taught patience, gratitude, and respect. People now dreamed of the future instead of fearing it. The world became more predictable and more creative. As villages grew, farmers helped each other. When one field failed, neighbors shared what they had. Because everyone knew that someday they might need help too. This spirit of sharing made communities strong and kind. And soon, stories and wisdom spread from one family to another. People told tales of how seeds were gifts from the gods. They imagined that the rain was tears of the sky, watering the earth. Children listened wide-eyed, wondering if maybe their garden really did have a little magic inside it. In a way, it did. The magic of life itself. Because every seed carried a miracle, and humans had finally learned how to unlock it. The first crops and gardens changed everything. They turned survival into living. They turned wandering tribes into rooted families. They gave birth to homes, traditions, and dreams. And soon, from these small gardens, entire civilizations would bloom. As the years passed, the first farmers began to understand that nature had her moods, gentle one season, fierce the next. When rain poured endlessly, their new crops drowned beneath the mud, and when the sun refused to rest, the ground split like dry bread. So they started watching the skies, learning the patterns of clouds, wind, and stars. They began digging channels that brought river water to their thirsty plants, guiding streams with their bare hands. These first irrigation systems were simple, but they changed everything. Now, even when the rain stayed away, life could still grow. Villages that once starved could finally eat all year long. With food in store, people felt a strange new thing, security, and from that comfort came imagination. They began experimenting with seeds, noticing that some grew stronger when saved from the best plants. Without knowing it, they were shaping the future of agriculture. Families gathered every morning to work together under the warm sun. Children helped carry baskets, laughing as they ran between rows of wheat. Mothers tended vegetable patches and sang to the rhythm of their grinding stones. Fathers fixed wooden plows and sharpened stone sickles. The sound of human life began to blend with the sounds of nature, birds, wind, and rustling leaves. In the evenings, smoke rose from clay hearths, and families gathered to share roasted grains and dried fruits. They told stories of brave ancestors, of rivers that spoke, and of seeds that carried the breath of life. The world of humans and nature was no longer separate, it had become one. Gardens became sacred spaces, cared for with both love and prayer. Every sprouting leaf was a promise, every harvest a celebration of survival. Some people noticed that plants grew better side by side, beans beside corn, herbs near flowers. They began planting with intention, giving birth to the earliest understanding of ecology. To keep the earth rich, they learned to let fields rest, or to plant different crops each season. These were the first steps toward sustainable farming, born not from science, but from patient observation. New tools appeared, stone sickles, sturdy wooden hoes, and bone-tipped rakes that softened the soil. Every invention made the land yield more, and life became just a little easier. Clay jars filled with golden grain were hidden in cool pits to last through dry seasons. When hunger no longer ruled their lives, people found time to create beauty. They painted pots with spirals, stars, and lines that told stories of rain, harvest, and sun. They sculpted small clay figures, mothers holding infants, farmers offering grain as thanks to the earth. In the glow of the fire, the first artists of agriculture were born. Villages grew lively, filled with laughter, smells of bread, and the music of wooden flutes. When the harvest came, people danced barefoot in the fields, drumming and singing to the rhythm of the earth. Children wore garlands of wild flowers, and the air shimmered with joy. Harvest festivals became more than celebrations, They became rituals of gratitude. Through farming, humans learned to depend on one another in new ways. Neighbors worked side by side, helping with planting and harvest. They began to share not just food, but knowledge. Trade blossomed, grains for fruits, pots for salt, beads for honey. Small marketplaces appeared, filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of stone tools. A new kind of wealth had emerged, the wealth of cooperation. As villages grew, people started marking their lands with stones or small fences. It wasn't ownership as we know it today, it was stewardship. They cared for their land as they cared for each other. If a neighbor's crops failed, others shared their stores. They remembered the hunger of wandering days, and no one wished to return to that life. Before long, people began to tame the wild animals that lived nearby. They noticed that goats and sheep followed the fields and provided milk and wool. By feeding and sheltering them, humans gained loyal companions. The first shepherds were born. Now, food came not only from the ground, but also from animals they nurtured. This bond changed the rhythm of life forever. Families no longer needed to roam in search of food. Generations could grow up in the same place, walk the same fields, and tend the same gardens as their ancestors. Roots, human roots, began to take hold in the soil. Farming also taught people to measure time. Hunters followed herds, but farmers followed seasons. They studied when the rains arrived, when the sun rose highest, and when the stars shifted in the night sky. With sticks and stones, they marked the passage of moons. They invented the first calendars, mapping their lives to the rhythm of the heavens. Each season became a story, planting in spring, growing in summer, harvesting in fall, resting in winter. People celebrated each moment with music, food, and dance. Children learned from their elders that the earth was alive, and that to care for it was to care for themselves. They were taught to plant with respect and harvest with gratitude. This wisdom passed quietly from one generation to the next, deeper than any words. Villages spread across river valleys, along the Nile, the Euphrates, and the Indus, where the soil was dark and fertile. Homes made of mud and straw rose in clusters, their walls painted with simple designs of plants and animals. Smoke curled from cooking fires, and the laughter of children echoed through the fields. The hum of human life filled the air, the song of a world awakening. As tools improved and knowledge spread, farmers began to teach one another across great distances. They learned how to store seeds safely, how to control pests, and how to care for soil after each harvest. Wisdom became a new kind of treasure, more valuable than gold or stone. From these lessons, small villages slowly grew into towns, and those towns, in time, would give rise to the first cities. Farming had done more than feed people, it had united them. It gave them not just food, but meaning. It taught patience, cooperation, and hope. It inspired art, music, stories, and dreams. When dawn broke over their golden fields, people stood quietly for a moment, watching the light spill across their crops. They no longer saw themselves as wanderers, but as caretakers of the earth. Because when humans learned to grow their first crops and gardens, they also learned how to grow their souls and their future.